So I'm going to say, come sit at my table. This has been a difficult lesson to hear, but I want you to come next to me and listen to my words. So I was about 11 years old. This would have been 1965, you do the math, and living in the far northeast of Brazil. My dad was in the Peace Corps, and as a family, we lived in Fortaleza, Ceará. All the children of American diplomats went to the only accredited American school there. I distinctly remember going for the intake interview with my parents. But soon it became clear that there was no room for my sister and me at this school, although the children of all the other diplomats went to that school. This would not be an intake interview. My parents were plainly told that we would not be attending school there. Now, fast forward 35 or 40 years, I was a big girl when I had a conversation with my mother about that day. She never realized that I even remembered that moment, and I never realized that there was no room at this particular school because it was an American missionary school, a Southern Baptist American missionary school, and children of color, despite the fact that this was in multiracial Brazil, children of color were not accepted, were not welcome. Now, I tell this story not just to say that I was denied, that was bad enough, but I say it to recognize my parents, who never gave me reason to hold that hatred. They never, that ugly, unapologetic racism that denied two little girls attending school because of the color of their skin. Well, mother homeschooled us using an American system. Peace Corps Washington made concessions to get our schoolwork to us. Sergeant Shriver was then director of the Peace Corps, and he was furious. But there was no change from the missionaries. All my friends went to that school, and we went into the garage to the homeschool classroom. Parents protect their children in many ways, and I am eternally grateful to mine for protecting me from that ugly reality of racism. As Amanda Gorham in The Hill We Climb said, "We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation because we know that inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens, but one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. I am the legacy of that birthright change, and I am here to invite you to come and sit at my table. I'm here today to introduce you to Coming to the Table. Coming to the Table is an organization that brings the daughters and sons of the descendants of enslaved people and the daughters and sons, the descendants of enslavers, brings them together at the table of brotherhood as Dr. Martin Luther King envisioned. Now, the table that we speak of stands for taking America beyond the legacy of enslavement, taking America beyond the legacy of enslavement. Together, we're able to explore those things that we have in common and to face those places where the legacy of enslavement has created and contributes to white supremacy. Some people protest, saying that they are recent immigrants to our country well beyond the early history of enslavement. But I would be hard-pressed to think of anyone, black, white, brown, or otherwise, who is not affected positively or negatively by white supremacy, by privilege. There is a place at the table for each of us. Come sit at my table. Coming to the table addresses truth, justice, and healing, working together to create a just and truthful society that acknowledges and seeks to heal from the racial wounds of the past, from slavery and the many forms of racism it formed. Now, my ancestors came to this country from Cape Verde, now known as the Republic of Cape Verde. They came in the very beginning of the last century. The men came to work in the whaling industry, and the women followed to work in the New England textile mills. I consider myself a Cape Verdean American. I am part of the diaspora of Africa, even though my ancestors did not come across the Middle Passage on slave ships. Nevertheless, I carry my race with me wherever we go. I pray it is never a chip on my shoulder. But when I walk into a space, everyone can identify that I am a woman of color, and for some, that will dictate how they perceive me. We heard that so beautifully expressed in the children's story this morning. Some will be deferential, some dismissive. Assumptions may be made. Some will pull their purses a little closer, check their wallets. Others will seek me out as representative of all Black people everywhere. Well, neither profile is correct. But I recognize that profiles will be made. When, as a member of the white population, you walk into a space, you can leave the discussions and assumptions of race behind. Most of the time. Brad is my dear friend, my brother. We became part of each other's lives back in college, and we've now been friends for 50 years. Brad is white. The first time Brad was among my relatives, a healthy mix of Black and brown people, he was perplexed. Jane, I'm the only white person here. I looked around. Yeah, I guess you are. No, really. I'm the only one. I'm the only white guy. Well, there was some back and forth, and finally I blurted out, how many times do you think I've been the only person of color in a group of white folks? Put your big boy panties on and deal with it. Well, you need not identify your whiteness or the heritage that lies behind your whiteness as a factor in how you will be perceived. But coming to the table conversations in circle seek to offer you a space to acknowledge your relationship to the legacy of slavery and racism as it drives white supremacy and institutionalized racism. It gives you a safe space to do this. Ideally, and we never get to ideally, a coming to the table circle will consist of 50% majority and 50% minority so that there is space to talk through your place in the institution, in the construct that is race, and be called in. As the song said, we call one another in. We don't call each other out. When a thought is hurtful or harmful to someone else, we call them in about it. But in fact, the reality of coming to the table circles is that they are mostly populated by the white population. It is this group, dare I say it, it is your group, who needs to do the work of establishing their relationship to race and all that comes with that. You will determine your Ubuntu, your independence, which is, in the African worldview, inseparable from interdependence, where the solitary expands to solidarity. Fania Davis defines Ubuntu in her little book of Race and Restorative Justice this way. The Nguni proverb, translated as, I am because we are, and we are because I am, expresses the universal African core belief that the individual exists only in relationship to the collective. She says, it is our responsibility to live in right relationship and be present to one another and to the earth in ways that promote healing and flourishing for all. You will come to terms with your relationship to race and oppression. You will find your relationship to one another and how you may promote healing and flourishing for all. You may do so in the comfort of a coming to the table circle or in other ways. You must examine your heart to know and understand your relationship to race oppression and whether you'd benefit by the circle process of coming to the table. And again, let's listen to Amanda Gorman. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so let me present to you the ideas that Reverend Dr. King promoted in his letter from the Birmingham jail. Today, unfortunately, we face some of the same issues regarding race and oppression of peoples as we did back in the day of Dr. King. Black and brown people, Muslims, non-Christians continue to be marginalized in many ways. He said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. You are part of this. If you are not directly affected, you certainly are indirectly. Solitary versus solidarity. And let's enlarge this meaning and note that if you are queer or neurodivergent or undocumented or disabled or any other version of a non-normative cisgendered white male person, you are directly affected. The letter from Birmingham is, to be sure, focused on civil disobedience. You know, in our nation's history, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. And if tariffs prevail, drinking coffee might be such an act of civil disobedience, or failing to drink coffee. For another day. But the letter from Birmingham also says that there may be times when your participation in civil disobedience is the only way to make your voice heard. I want to focus, though, on Dr. King's confession to his Jewish and Christian clergymen. He said, "I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the White Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klan, but the moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding of people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Come sit at my table. Which person are you? You are a UU, so certainly not a White Citizens Council member. And we understand that Unitarian Universalists stood shoulder to shoulder and gave their lives with Dr. King in his Herculean strides toward freedom. But who will you be today in the stride toward freedom and equality for all? Dr. King did not tell his followers to get rid of their discontent. Rather, he said that this normal and healthy discontent can be channeled into the creative outlet of nonviolent direct action. And if you choose to channel this action to other political issues affecting our society today, I, for one, will applaud you. You know, I just last night, closed a play called Alabama Story. Alabama Story is about a children's book called The Rabbit's Wedding. It was about a black bunny and a white bunny who decide, as bunnies do, to get married. And it was written in the 1950s. Still available today. You can read it to your children and grandchildren. But that story talked about Juliet Hampton Morgan, who we heard in our children's story this morning. Juliet Hampton Morgan not only rode the buses in Montgomery, but she also insisted on equality in libraries for children of color. And there is even today a library named after Juliet Hampton Morgan in Montgomery, Alabama. So I was so pleased to hear about her in the talk this morning. I went to Catholic school when not in Brazil. It was a white Portuguese school, and I was a Cape Verdean, a person of color, maybe one of 4, 5, 6 kids of color in that entire school. Now, May was considered the month of Mary, very revered, very special, and in each grade, from kindergarten to 8th grade, every week, a girl was selected to be the May Queen. It was an honor to be selected. And she got to wear her best party dress or communion dress instead of her uniform when presenting flowers to Mary. I attended that school all but 2 years in Brazil, when I lived in Brazil, and I never once was selected to be May Queen. I desperately wanted to be the May Queen. In my work with Coming to the Table, I suddenly had a revelation. Children of color were never going to be selected as May Queen. The color of my skin meant that I would always have to watch from the sidelines. It wasn't an accident that I wasn't chosen. I was a big girl before I realized that. Amanda Gorman says, we lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in the bridges we've made. That is the promise to Glade, the hill we climb if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. So I challenge you. I challenge you to be an extremist as was Dr. King. He said it was not a question of whether one would be an extremist, but what kind of extremist one would be. Modeling Jesus, an extremist for love, he said, love your enemies, do good to them that hate you. Quoting Amos, an extremist for justice, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Observing John Bunyan, he said, I will stay in jail till the end of my days before I make a butchery of my conscience. And Abraham Lincoln, who said, this nation cannot survive half slave and half free. And finally, Thomas Jefferson, who said, we hold these truths that all people are created equal. Every breath from my bronze-pounded chest will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limed hills of the West. We will rise from the windswept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we will step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. May it be so. Ashe and amen.